Hello and welcome to Workforce Wisdom. I'm your host, Christy Bray, Chief Strategy Officer at PracticeLink. This podcast focuses on the latest trends in healthcare recruitment while showcasing innovative strategies, success stories, and fresh perspectives affecting the healthcare workforce. These episodes lead to in-depth, thoughtful discussions with recognized industry-leading healthcare professionals exploring the challenges of healthcare recruitment and beyond. Whether you're an experienced recruitment professional or just starting out, this podcast aims to help you discover how experts are reshaping the industry, leveraging technology, and fostering inclusive hiring practices. Today's episode of Workforce Wisdom, Accelerating Physician Growth with Zed Williamson. Welcome, Zed.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Zed Williamson is the founder of TrackableMed and the Physician Growth Accelerator, helping private medical practices accelerate profitable growth. He's also the host of 2 podcasts, including the Physician Growth Accelerator podcast, where medical practice leaders can hear actionable insights, strategies, and experts' advice to optimize their medical practice. For over a decade, Zed and his team have helped hundreds of medical practices achieve their business goals. That is a great background and story of what you've been able to do. And I know in this climate, the private practice has been shrinking probably over the last 15 years, maybe even longer. So tell me a little bit, your career path is anything but typical for someone who focuses on physician growth. What initially inspired you to enter this space, and how did TrackableMed come to be?
Sure. Yeah. Years ago, I actually come from the advertising industry, but I'm not very fond of it. I think it's totally riddled with a complete lack of accountability to actual results. And what I found myself in this industry that I thought I wanted to climb the ladder of, and I didn't really trust the industry. And so it was hard for me to get behind that idea. But through that time, I also spent a lot of time studying and understanding neuroscience and the behavior of humans, because that's truly what good advertising is about changing behavior. And came across the opportunity to witness the outcome of patients changing their behavior in a way that was beneficial for them. And I saw that, in the advertising world, a lot of industry believes that healthcare or medical is this very wealthy industry that can just throw a bunch of money at advertising and not really care about what happens. And the problem is, one thing that's always been important to me is the idea that people don't have to live the way they're living. Many times our brain talks us into thinking that we're supposed to be unhappy or we're just supposed to be this way. And in reality, there's a lot of things we can do. And so what I came across was a minimally invasive procedure, worked with a local medical practice, and drove patients in specifically for this procedure. And it caught the notice of some medical device companies that started introducing me to more clients. And I started the company in 2011. And continued to grow it year over year, because what we found out is that so many patients suffer with things that they don't know are fixable. And they have this bias against going to medical, facilities, doctors, practices, and it keeps them from fixing these issues. And it's funny because I could be in a room of 1,000 physicians, and I'd say, raise your hand if you've ever heard a patient tell you, boy, I wish I would have come in sooner. And the entire room will raise their hand. So that's how it got started. Initially, it was using advertising to drive patient behavior. Then we realized that there was an issue with phones at medical practices. So we started an appointment setting call center so that we could actually take that patient all the way through the process and put it into the practice. And that was how TrackableMed got started in 2011.
So 14 years then from advertising and media to into this healthcare specialization. And I know I've had a previous guest, we talk a lot about like secret shopper calls, or that entry point into a practice is sometimes where you have the toughest barriers to get through. Are there any key experiences that shaped your approach to that patient and practice growth?
Absolutely. In the beginning, we would track the response from advertising. And so you would get this type of response that was high five worthy, right? So it's overwhelming response, but then the practice wouldn't feel it on the other side. And so you're trying to figure out, how is this possible? And it was really because of the phone. I mean, we did a 7,000 call study back in, that's probably 2017. And the average practice, I should say the practices missed an average of 42% of all incoming phone calls. That's no voicemail, no one answered, literally 42%. And imagine if you applied that to any other business where people trying to use you as a company, right in the beginning, you just threw 42% of them away. It's an unreal idea. So that's why we went down the path. But it turns out, we thought we were pretty fancy, thought it was a cool idea, but it didn't fix everything, because medical practices have issues beyond the phones. And that's where Physician Growth Accelerator came from, where this idea that these practices are feeling the squeeze. 15 years ago, private medical practice, mediocrity paid pretty well from a business standpoint. But that's not the case anymore. Reimbursements go down, costs are going up, and these practices are thinking, well, I need more new patients, or let's advertise, let's market, let's increase our capacity. That's rarely the issue. And so we realized that if we're really going to stand behind the idea that we are going to be result-driven in driving health into the business of the medical practice, that we have to take care of the entire system from before a patient knows they have an issue all the way through the practice being able to collect reimbursement.
Right. And I think you kind of identified, some of the gaps that Physician Growth Accelerator has helped. Is there anything else really that differentiates itself from that traditional marketing to really getting to that growth mindset?
Yeah, now we would say people probably shouldn't market, until they fix these other things. If I have a glass of water that has a capacity of 8 ounces, but I wish there was more in it, it doesn't matter how much I pour into a full glass, it will never have more than 8 ounces. And that's what we witness with these medical practices, is they're living in the now. They know what's wrong. They don't really know how to fix it. So what they do is they throw things at it. Let's try to get these. Let's try to get this. But you just have problems pop back up. So advertising and marketing is a piece that may be necessary, but chances are a medical practice is losing more than they could gain from advertising anyway. And it's, between a patient knowing they have an issue and getting a first appointment, we've identified 11 steps that if something goes wrong, that person doesn't get to the practice.
Wow.
So those 11 steps would happen after advertising. So imagine you invest a bunch of money into marketing, and then you cross your fingers that these 11 steps go well. I'd say let's fix the 11 steps and then maybe market.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes with the recruitment space, you end up focusing on strategies that either were driven by finance, if it's sometimes there was a big pop to say, go find urology or go find ENT, or, those are two of the hardest that you're going to look for in the job market, but they somewhere, I think everybody learned at some conference years ago, like, well, this is what, this is a revenue generator. Well, that's awesome. But we have to actually have the physician to be able to pull that off, let alone equipment and other things that are needed there. So what are some of the common mindset roadblocks? You talked about a couple of them, and definitely the 11 that really physicians or those practices, maybe their practice leadership, that hinder their business growth. And then how do you help them shift that?
Sure. So there's something interesting about physicians and the way that they have been trained. They get put into this kind of a strange scenario where they wait, a patient shows up, and there's something going on with that patient in that moment. The physician had nothing to do with the life of that patient leading up to that moment, and they will have very little to do with the life of that patient after that moment. So they have to treat that moment as the best opportunity to either fix or tweak something. Okay. The challenge is they do that every single day, and then they unfortunately apply the same thought process to their business. And business doesn't work that way. Business, we were the entire life cycle of it. You don't get to, tell your patient go back in time and stop drinking Dr. Pepper. But with your own business, you have to own all of those things. And that's why one of the biggest things that we have to overcome is identifying what is it you're trying to achieve. So let's create this goal that's measurable, that we can clearly see that we're there. Let's define the leading indicators and metrics that are going to get us there. And then let's actually dive into the root cause of when things get in our way, as opposed to apply quick fixes. The application of quick fix doesn't work in business. You will just continue to do the same thing over and over again. And in medical practices, whatever you see today that you're frustrated with was created weeks or months ago. And so if you go and try to change something in your operation today because of what you're seeing today, you're not going to see the outcome of that change for weeks or months, and you may not have applied the correct thing. You might have made it worse. So from a mindset standpoint, it's about understanding what do we need to measure so we truly understand where we are, and then what are the changes that we make to the business and to drive towards that goal. I would say that's the number one thing. The number two thing is the focus on the engagement and alignment of the team. It's probably the biggest killer of the health of a private practice business is that alignment of the team. Are they there to actually support your goals? Are you giving them the leadership they need to be able to be excited about coming to work Monday morning, absolutely crush it through the week, and high five at the end of the week?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Worked for a CEO, and his saying was that he wanted us to be a workplace where people jumped out of bed in the morning, ready to come to work. One of the things that I was thinking of when you were answering that question, really, how often when you're working with private practice, do you help them, if they were specialists? I'm thinking the reliability on an ASC or a hospital, right, from a revenue standpoint for that practice. How often does that overlap for you when what you're working on really is within a private practice that's just affiliated with potential larger health system?
It's all part of the system. So the foundation of the Physician Growth Accelerator is that everything you experience, everything I experience, everything that every person on the planet experiences is the perfect outcome of their current system. So if there is a practice that is affiliated and there's other pieces to the pie, all of those pieces are part of the system. So if they're not achieving their goals, we need to understand what the influence of those pieces of the system are. And that's why we do a diagnostic. We do a practice diagnostic up front to understand what we need to tweak. Sometimes people, you look at the diagnostic and many people will say at first, like, look, I already know what's wrong. We don't need to do a diagnostic. And I would agree with them that they probably have a good sense of what's wrong. The purpose of the diagnostic is to understand what are the pieces in which we are going to tweak to fix what's wrong. And so the example you bring up, it's going to be a part of it because it's a part of it. And then the way you either tweak or adapt the system is going to be based on what is off compared to what you're trying to achieve.
Right. And I know you mentioned background in neuroscience, and I'm just curious if you can elaborate on a concept, called the patient brain, really as it relates to marketing and messaging in healthcare, and how you're triggering or creating those signals where folks are more attracted, or they're ready to come for that patient care that maybe they've been putting off.
Sure. So our brain is pretty fancy, but it is old. And it was designed to survive in a world that doesn't exist anymore. So if you imagine, it has one goal, and that's to stay alive by making very quick decisions that use very little energy, because it doesn't realize it has access to fuel, okay? So if you just kind of think of the brain as this separate thing that thinks it's starving all the time, that thinks it's going to be impossible for it to get fuel, and that every decision it makes has to keep you alive. Okay, that's the built-in software. Now take someone who's dealing with added health issues, either physical pain, symptoms that cause trouble of any kind, chances are a little stress. When those things come up, these automatic decision-making machines control our behavior even more. And so if we call those bias and heuristics, okay, and there's many known specific heuristics. And what happens with patients is they are making decisions that they don't really realize, and they're all first-order consequence decisions, meaning the brain is saying, I'm alive right now. I may not be happy, but I'm alive, and I don't know if I'm going to be alive tomorrow, so I'm only going to make decisions that support my right now. And what the brain tends to ignore are the second and third order consequences of, well, wait a second, this might affect me this way, and this might affect me this way. So from a messaging standpoint, imagine the two scenarios where you're talking to the same patient, and let's say this patient has some kind of chronic pain, chronic knee pain, let's just call it that. And one messaging from a practice is, hey, we're a fancy practice. We've got a lot of doctors, and we care about humans, and we have technology, and look how incredibly fancy we are, and look at us. And imagine the patient's mindset, where their brain is going, I'm alive today. I'm only going to make decisions that help me survive more of today. That patient doesn't go to that practice. If you imagine another practice that says, hey, you're dealing with chronic knee pain and you're noticing it's impacting your life. You're not getting down on the floor and playing with your grandchildren. People want to go on a trip and you put it off, or you actually choose not to go on a vacation because the physical pain is too much to handle and you don't want to hold other people back. Now you start getting that person nodding their head in the sense of, okay, I am being understood by healthcare. And then your messaging can help guide that patient. And it's not about promoting how great you are. The patients don't care. There's an old baseball movie with Kevin Costner called The Field of Dreams. There's a quote that's relatively misused from that movie, and it's, if you build it, they will come. But in reality, it's when you build it, no one cares. And that's the business side of what that quote really is. And so as a medical practice, you can put a picture of the doctors in their fancy coats on a billboard. You can, run ads and, show smiling faces and big pieces of technology. And that is completely a waste of money. If you're trying to drive new patient growth, you got to connect to the emotion of that patient. You have to overcome thousands and thousands of years of what has kept humans alive. If you think about it, if you go way back when, and you have two guys, ancient humans, in the same scenario, we are not related to the guy who's chilling out watching the sunset. We're related to the guy that's running away from the saber-toothed tiger. Mm-hmm. And that drives our behavior today.
Yeah. I think, what you really described, moving from that transactional messaging towards that compelling storytelling in driving that patient behavior. Are there a couple of things that you find that are the most common as you're going in to help these practices?
So what we will always do, if we're creating messaging designed to drive patient behavior change, we actually will interview patients and take them through a process where we uncover the hidden biases and heuristics that are in the way of them taking action. And those you have found to be pretty specific to what that patient is experiencing, and then the demographic of the typical patient within that specialty. Generally, this kind of goes back to the idea that the marketing industry has some broken pieces to it. It's one of the worst things that happens. But you have a company who gets paid to do marketing, or maybe they get paid to build your website as a practice owner. And here's the thing that starts off the engagement. Hey, what do you want it to be? It's the worst question, because the website is not for the practice. The website is for patients. And the developers, the creative people, they go, ooh, what do you like? Oh, yeah, we can make it exactly like you like it. And then you get these websites where it's like a woman in a sundress twirling in a bed of daisies, and that's an allergy practice. And there's no human on the planet that's looking at that website going, oh my gosh, I was doing that yesterday. They totally know who I am. It's being created for the business owner, not for the potential patient. So I would say the biggest mistake is people say, companies go, do you like it? And then practices believe that they're supposed to have an opinion because you shouldn't. It's really for the patient.
Yeah. I worked in several health systems where it was really a focus on patient and family-centered care. So beyond just that acronym, and I mean, everything we did was focused in that way, and family as they defined it, not as we defined it, but as they defined it. Is that something that translates into a practice as well? Kind of that concept of, that patient-focused care?
Yeah, I think it's a term that gets a little overused right now. It just has to be defined. Because imagine going to a practice and say, hey, do you guys provide patient-focused care? Nah, we don't do that. No one's going to tell you no. And so there's value in defining what that really means. And then how are you supporting it with your behavior? Because it's, the proof is in the pudding. So if you say you're doing patient-centered care, then what does that really look like? I'm a big fan of the platinum rule. Most people have heard of the golden rule, the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I think that's a little bit broken because other people are not you. So the platinum rule is the idea that do unto others as they would have done unto them. And to me, that's a pretty good definition of patient-centered care, where understanding the patient from their perspective, the patient feeling heard, and then the actions that are being taken are from the perspective of what the patient wants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good explanation. I like the platinum rule, by the way. I think that is very good thing for folks to remember. We touched a little bit on aligning your recruitment targets with practice growth. How closely do you work, either with a recruiter, which a lot of private practices, they may not have their own recruiter. They may work with an agency or an outside firm to help them, but how closely are you aligning those recruitment strategies, to patient growth so that business, that it remains scalable over time?
Yeah, it is so important. It is hiring someone is one of the most broken processes that exist. And if you just simply break it down, it is set up for disaster from the beginning because you take a business owner. As a business owner, you want every human in existence to want to work at your business. That doesn't mean you want them there, but you want them to want to work there. And anybody you interview, they want to be offered a position to work at your business. Even if they don't want to work at your business, they want to be offered one. So you get these two perspectives that create the worst scenario for a conversation to uncover true potential long-term fit. And this is with every role in the business, not just providers. So we focus a lot on hiring and recruiting and having a very specific system so that you are bringing people in who fit the team from a alignment and engagement. They understand where you're going. And then specifically related to capacity, this is, it's a very poorly measured number. And someone will say things like, yeah, I'm busy. And I don't like that word because we could all be busy. And if you have 10 providers describe busy, you're going to get 10 different descriptions. Absolutely. And then you can have this culture of busy where, but, it's just we don't really have enough slots. So then you're thinking, well, I got to recruit a whole nother surgeon or provider. And in reality, the data is telling you, no, you probably could use an MA and be smarter with your system. But there's going to be a point where maybe you need to increase that capacity. but you should be able to look ahead and know when you're going to get there. You should never be like, hey, you know what? We need a new doctor today, because the data exists for you to understand where you are on that path. So our approach is understand the entire system, look to your specific goals that you want to achieve, do those goals get achieved without hiring anybody? If the answer is no, then plan your capacity, increase process by understanding who you really need to bring in, because chances are you have providers that are not working to the top of their license in your current business. Chances are the main provider or surgeon is over capacity, but everyone else is under capacity. So it's about looking into the system and building it on purpose.
Did you know PracticeLink is not only home of the most widely used online physician job board, but we also have our own magazine? PracticeLink magazine has not only won several awards, including 2 ASBE Awards of Excellence in 2023, but it's also completely free. Over 375,000 physicians and residents receive copies of PracticeLink magazine each year, and you can too by visiting practicelink.com/magazine. That's practicelink.com/magazine. Thank you for listening. Now we'll return to the podcast.
So you talked, I know that TrackableMed focuses a lot on measurable growth. Are there specific KPIs or signals that you track that might surprise our audience regarding, impact on medical practice?
Yeah, typically one of the most surprising things is the relationship between multiple KPIs. And just think about this, and if you're not driving, kind of close your eyes and just imagine what information exists in these few numbers. Imagine if you knew exactly how many unique humans attempted to call you today. Let's say that number is 100. Let's say you knew exactly how many of those people who called booked an appointment for someday in the future. Let's say that number was 40. Let's say the number of people that you were scheduled to show up today was 35. And let's say the actual number of people who showed up today was 30. And so just those specific numbers over time and the relationship between those, so that you truly understand what are all the pieces doing in my organization to create the outcome I'm going to see later. Because if you look at your collections at the end of the month, and let's say you have an accountant that sends you an income statement or a P&L, that a profit and loss, that shows you here's all your costs, here's your income, and here's what's left over. 99 out of 100 times that document is worthless in making any decisions, because everything that happened to create that document happened over months. And if you're not aware of the measurables that created that specific outcome, that little bit of measurement of, profit and loss at the end of the month is pretty close to useless. And that's usually what surprises people, is that they've been looking at something or think they should look at something that is giving them zero insight into how they should, change or run the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sure you're often asked to, come in and look at probably prior data, historical data. And it's probably a tough conversation to have. You're not saying, throw the data out, it's garbage, but going back to some of the basics, just like you broke that down, fairly easy. And assuming that in an EMR, I don't know practices today that aren't, but, in an EMR where you can gather that data, maybe they have some type of call system, we're able to, gather those things a little bit easier today in today's technologies. Yeah.
Well, and if you think about everything is an equation. Like they are running an algebraic equation, and they may not be aware of it. They may be aware of it, and they have some variables in that equation, and they have some knowns. And the more knowns we make, especially after the equals sign, then we can really predict that we're going to get somewhere or not. So let's say someone has an income goal. I'm just going to use that for ease. And let's say they want to net $500,000 at the end of the year. If we can do the data and understand that the year value of a patient is $2,000 and the cost of goods sold is 20%, then you can literally build an equation that says what must happen for you to achieve that specific outcome by this time frame. And what you do is you set that up, and you don't just wait 365 days and go, hey, did we get there? You look and you say, well, you know what? We're veering off course. Why? Oh my gosh. We didn't realize, your providers only work 3 days a week. We're never going to hit the number unless we fill their capacity or whatever it is. But that's what I geek out about that, because there's nothing that is unattainable if we're looking at the whole system. I had a meeting with a group of providers, and they came up with a bunch of goals. And I said, the good news is every goal you wrote down is totally attainable. The bad news is not by you, because the things that you have in your way right now, the system will not get there. Now, they can tweak it, but we can't just write a goal and say, well, we'll show up there like a stick running down a river. We have to be purposeful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a success story? I'm sure you have several, but a success story where you helped a practice go from kind of that stagnant growth, or like you said, you're never going to get there, to really significant momentum after adopting these strategies?
Oh, yeah. One of my favorites was a practice that we hosted a strategic meeting, like an offsite meeting with their team. And the meeting was going really well. And they put a really big goal, something they'd never achieved. And some of them were nervous about the number. They kind of argued it, which was great. And a year later, we did their next one, and they absolutely nailed that number. And they witnessed that they achieved something that most people would believe that it wasn't doable, and that it wasn't this amazing, one item that went perfect. It just was the consistent paying attention to the metrics that give us an idea of where we are. An example I use, because it's really simple. I'm in the New Orleans area. If I wanted to drive to Denver, I know where Denver is. I can create a path. If I have definitions like I need to get to Denver by Tuesday at 5 p.m., then I know how to build my trip to get to Denver by 2 p.m. on Tuesday. And I know very soon if I'm on track to make it or not, because it's all very easy and measurable. Business is the same thing. It's just we have to get the data from different places. And that is by far my favorite thing in the world, is when someone puts a stretch goal up that is really kind of a gut check. Whew, this is going to be hard. And when they hit it, oh man, is that awesome. Because then like the next year, the goal was even bigger. And now it was like, we got this. We'll figure it out. We're not going to wait to see if we get there, but we're going to make it happen. And that's fun to watch a team get so aligned to achieve those things.
We talked a little bit about technology and leveraging that through EMR, scheduling system, phone systems. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways. Is there anything specific with AI or automation that's changing the way you coach practices on growth?
So when AI comes up, it may not impact how we coach on growth, but AI is a powerful tool when used correctly. And if you imagine, the value of AI is not necessarily asking it questions for it to answer you, but more to give it guidance so it can accelerate the speed of getting to a place. And so there's some tools that we've seen clients really enjoy around charting, which is a good use of AI. The things that I'm seeing that are not a good use of AI is, if we just ask AI how to do something, then we just do it that way. Or, you start to see what's going to happen is marketing companies in posting, social media, people think, well, now this is going to be great because AI will handle it. Well, but the thing is everybody in the world has it. So the bar is just going to change. So it's just being about thinking specifically how you're going to use the tool, and does it bring value to you and your patients in a way that makes sense, as opposed to we just use it because, or you're trying to force it into a use case that doesn't really make sense. Prompting, it's here. So to me, there's value in learning. I would jump on Coursera and take a free or small, prompt engineering course, a couple hours online for people to understand it, because it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently presented in Canada, and we talked through kind of the ROADS framework in terms of when you're prompting AI, and it is a learned, it's learning from you all the time.
Yep.
So I agree, just like taking what it spits out is not, you can't just do that. That just isn't it. You have to, there is some massaging and some other human touch that has to get involved within that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you know how to guide it, it can get you quick analysis of things that is good. It's when you ask it to do something for you and it's basing it on the knowledge of all things in existence, it's really easy for it to go sideways. But if you say, here is this specific set of data, I want you to do this specific thing with this specific data using this specific lens, that is really good use of AI.
So we touched a little bit on physician well-being in the sense of, if they're able to actually cure or help people at an earlier stage in maybe their disease or their life cycle, how does practice growth align with physician well-being? We know burnout, it's declined post-COVID, according to several studies, but AMA and other places. But I would think the stress as a business owner, potentially, if they're a partner or just within that practice, that is their sole, paycheck day to day. How much or how often do you focus on that physician well-being within the constructs of, we want to grow, but we don't want to burn you out?
Yeah. And I would actually argue that they are not related, meaning growth, and I'll walk you through what I mean. So growth can't create burnout by itself, because burnout does not come from busyness. If we think about even the word stress, if we put ourselves in a pure non-stress environment, that is not good for us as humans. We need stressors. The problem is when it becomes chronic. Chronic stress is where we have issues. But there's value to the stress of running a business and coming in and out of that stress. But burnout comes from, if I go back to the oars thing, imagine our team is all paddling at the exact same time, exact same strength, but our oars aren't in the water. That's where burnout comes from. It doesn't matter how hard you're paddling, if it's fast, if it's slow. If every day you believe you're not affecting things, that's where burnout comes from. And it's from a business standpoint, I'm going to use another boat reference. The reason why I would say that purposeful growth would never actually create burnout by itself is because burnout is like being in a sailboat with no keel and you're just being blown around. That's where you get burnout. And the key is, am I achieving something every day, every week, every month, every year? Did we move something forward? If you can answer that question, yes, well, guess what? We just grew. And I don't mean growth by the practice has to make more money. Growth is such a large word. But if we moved things forward in any sense, that is growth. And if we did those things on purpose, it's really hard to be burned out.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really good analogies. I have to ask her, are you a sailor? Do you own a boat?
I do own a boat.
Okay.
But I'm probably just an analogy guy. So
okay. Well, you have Jim Collins and a bus, or you have Zed Williamson and boats. So it's
there you
okay.
go. Yeah, perfect.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap this up and do a little rapid fire. I'm not gonna time you, but
okay.
if you had 60 seconds to give one piece of advice to a physician starting their practice tomorrow, let's say in the near future, and I may add the caveat, they're coming straight out of residency or fellowship, or they've been practicing for a while. I'm thinking maybe the advice might be different, but what would that be for those physicians?
Yeah, it's a good question. I will actually call back to something that came up earlier in the idea that when you build it, no one cares. So you starting a practice is not a if you build it, they will come scenario. It's when you build it, no one cares. That doesn't mean don't build it. It just means be aware of your blind optimism is going to be powerful in helping you get over some of the struggles to get started. But if you rely 100% on it, you'll also ignore the things that restrict your growth going forward. So to me, you've already proven yourself to be good at learning. I would dive into some couple business books, understand some systems, and set up your business as if it is running before you open it. Think about how patients get to you, what happens in the office, who helps who, what does your organizational chart look like based on a practice that's 5 years from now? What are the roles and responsibilities, and who is accountable to getting those things done? And now you've already had the framework, and now you just got to go make it real. So it's that balance between that blind optimism. You need it to get over those things because I know I had it. I look back at some decisions and I think to myself, how in the heck did I push through that? And it's because I had blind optimism. And you just got to know when to come out of that. I think it went over 60 seconds, but.
That's okay. No timer there. Is there a business book that you like or would recommend?
So I am an avid reader. I do believe it is a cheat code. Imagine anybody who's written a book that you get their entire whatever wisdom went into it, and you get to download it in a few hours. So I would always suggest reading as much as you can. To me, one of the easiest ones to get started with that would help someone think about the systems of their operation is a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. The reason I'm suggesting that one specifically is it is basically a recipe. And there's some theory in it, some philosophy, but in reality, it's a go do this. And it's a good place to get started.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. On behalf of PracticeLink, I want to thank Zed for appearing on Workforce Wisdom. For our listeners, please feel free to reach out with any thoughts, insights, or questions about anything we covered today. You can find TrackableMed's information on the PracticeLink website at www.practicelink.com under our Resource Center, or email plmedia@practicelink.com. My name is Christy Bray. Thank you for listening to Workforce Wisdom.